to Canada, India, USA Development Forum Health Forum, session number 6. This is a virtual health forum which we have been running for some time with the help of City of Brampton's Advanced Brampton Fund. Through this forum, we bring together doctors, medical officers of health, mind, body, wellness, nutrition, diabetes, and other experts, as well as the mayor of Brampton, city councillors, regional councillors, and various other experts to discuss various issues, especially during the pandemic. So today is the session number 6 on the topic of the role of not-for-profit organizations during a pandemic. Before we introduce our speakers, let me introduce the organization quickly. This health forum is organized by Canada, India, USA Development Forum, which is an Ontario, Canada-based not-for-profit organization working to promote bilateral and trilateral relations between Canada, India, and USA. CIUDF organizes events, conferences, and speaker series lectures with prominent corporate and political leaders in all 3 countries for ideas exchange and knowledge sharing. The forum recently opened up for memberships, and 21 companies and professionals have joined as members in the last 3 months, with more expected to join soon. We will also be hosting in-person events, conferences, as well as brunch meetings for members and sponsors very soon, now that the pandemic restrictions are slowly being eased. I truly am the founder, president, and CEO of Canada, India, USA Development Forum. And just to take a quick look at the activities that we do during the year, we host a Canada, India Insight annual conference, as well as a Canada, India, USA trilateral conference with high commissioners, ambassadors, consul generals, cabinet ministers, federal and provincial, from all 3 countries, as well as MPs and various corporate leaders, presidents and CEOs of large companies. We also host several business leaders roundtables, political leaders roundtables. Membership expansion is one of the goals to reach about 300 by next year end. Member networking events, virtual as well as in person. We also do a consul generals roundtable between the 3 countries, Canada, India, and US. We are running an education forum with presidents, deans, registrars, and key decision makers of various colleges and universities all across Canada, as well as from US and in India as well. So far, we have brought together education sector leaders from Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, Vancouver, from Haryana, from Michigan, just to name a few. We also have an e-publication, a Canada, India Insight e-publication, as well as we do various webinars and virtual sessions on current affairs and issues of importance. So with that, let us recognize the support of our sponsors, because of which we are able to do this. The Health Forum is supported by the City of Brampton's Advanced Brampton Fund. We are thankful to our partner organizations, PCHS Foundation and Suno Canada, as well as the other support provided by Best Ayurved, Process Research Cortec, Dentistry on 10, Truly Financial, Blue Umbrella Financial Services, Cranes Life Sciences, Tangentia, and Kotak Personal Injury Law. With that, let us bring in our first speaker of the day, Dr. Shivendra Dwivedi. Dr. Dwivedi is a senior anesthesiologist at Santa Cabrini Hospital in Montreal, and he is also a national president for Canada India Global Forum. He served as chief of Department of Anesthesia and president of the Chiefs of Department Committee for over 20 years at Santa Cabrini Hospital in Montreal. He is presently in charge of teaching medical students and residents and works as a senior anesthesiologist at the same institution. He graduated from McGill University with MD/CM degree in 1982 and finished his anesthesia residency at the Royal Victoria Hospital in 1987. Is a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada since 1987. Dr. Dwivedi is president of the Freedom from Poverty Foundation, which runs a charity school, medical clinics, and a charity hospital in India. The foundation has treated over 250,000 patients, and over 15,000 students have obtained their high school diploma from their school. He has received Humanitarian of the Year Award as well as the Community Service Award for his outstanding contributions. He served as the convener of the Montreal chapter prior to his induction as a member of the National Executive. Dr. Dwivedi is National President of Canada India Global Forum, working to build closer cooperation between Canada and India on the economical, cultural, and political fronts. I must say, an extremely impressive profile, Dr. Dwivedi. So we are very grateful that you have joined us today. And although you said you are on a call right now in a hospital, but thank you again for taking some time off to address us today. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Vipulji, for having me. And thank you very much for your organization for hosting these events. I think they perform a very important function to educate the community and people across Canada and USA and India. When it comes to roles of nonprofit organizations during this pandemic, I'll speak from our experience. We have basically been involved in the pandemic that's been happening in India, both in phase 1 and phase 2. So if you remember in phase 1, the pandemic was a real disaster where a lot of migrant laborers, especially from UP and Bihar, who were working in the big cities in India, were basically almost walking home. Because there was no setup, there was no intervention by the government to help these people get home. And they basically had no choice because the work dried up. So what we did as an organization, because I have the Freedom from Poverty Foundation was founded in 1993 by my dad and myself and some friends. And we have two arms in India, two partners. So one is the Freedom from Poverty Trust, which is based in Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, and the second is is called the Comprehensive Rural Health Program, which is based in Jamkhed, Maharashtra. So in phase 1, for the migrant laborers, the trust in Lucknow, because mostly there were people coming back in UP, fed about 25 to 30,000 laborers, both at the train station and the bus stop, just providing them food because they were hungry. There was no setup by the official administration to take care of that. And also in the phase 1, in our hospital in Maharashtra, which we run with our partners, basically our partners' hospital, we assist with it. And we were at 100 beds. We tripled it to 300 beds because we had so many acute care beds. The local MLA, Rohit Pawar, opened a 1,000-bed tent and a hospital, and we were at up to almost 500-600 patients, which we're providing free care for. So that was our intervention in phase 1. In phase 2, this past little while, your listeners may know or may not know. It really exploded in Maharashtra. So in phase 2, we were up to 1,300 patients in our system. We were overflowing with patients, and there was a huge problem with oxygen supply. So, there were a number of organizations came together, and I must point out the excellent work done by Ramesh Chotai in Toronto and his team in Toronto. They sent 3 plane loads of oxygen concentrators to India in this. We reacted a little bit differently in the sense that for treating these patients, first of all, oxygen concentrators are not as effective because you have to use very high flow oxygen. So what we did was we did a fundraising campaign, and thanks to our donors, we raised about $80,000, and we sent over what are called Venturi masks and pulse oximeters. And what you do with that is you can actually modulate the amount of oxygen you give to patients, so you're not giving them too much. And with the pulse oximeter, you can measure how they respond. So we could use the oxygen much more efficiently. And then working with the Indian High Commission, Sir Shri Ajay Bisaria ji, we intervened with, or we helped them linked up with ON2 Solutions. So ON2 Solutions is a company out in Winnipeg which produces actually what are called oxygen generating systems. And they use those in mines in northern Canada, but they've been adapted to hospital use. And the government of Canada gifted India 12 oxygen generating systems for their hospitals in need. And the last time when I spoke to Bisaria ji, they're actually considering opening a plant in India to manufacture oxygen generating plants in India. Now, that's because a lot of the oxygen generating equipment is actually manufactured in China, and it's very difficult to get it. So that's been our intervention. And then also in this past phase 2, to assist the UP government, I've sent teams of volunteers to about 25, I think about 28 villages in total, to do testing for COVID. And the patients who were positive, we were giving them free medication. And the idea was that if they're treated early, they will then not need hospitalization later on, so they don't overflood the public system. Right. So those are the interventions we've done as an organization. I think that the bigger question for most nonprofits, both here in Canada, USA, and in India, is that, why is there a need for nonprofits? Right. The reason is because of chronic underfunding in healthcare. And that's the reality. If the governments in Canada and US or India were funding the healthcare system adequately, there would be no need for nonprofits to help, right? I mean, the fact is that the Indian government decades ago decided basically to privatize healthcare and education. And so if you have money in India, you have excellent care, better than Canada actually. Leading edge care, and the doctors are excellent, everything is there. But if you're poor, you have very little care, and I would even visit almost no care, because the doctor who's supposed to be working in the public healthcare system, you go there and he's not there. There's a nurse maybe who's there, and the doctor's in his private clinic making money on top of what he's earning as a salary. And unfortunately, that's a very common occurrence. And heaven help you if some minister comes by for a visit, because everybody's focused on the visit and not to providing care. And that's just the situation there. In Canada, how come we have to do fundraisers for the hospitals to buy equipment? I mean, if you're adequately funding the system, there would be enough money to buy equipment, right? I don't know if you saw in Toronto, the Toronto Sick Kids runs many campaigns. All the major hospitals have foundations to raise money for equipment. Why is that? Why aren't we adequately funded? If we can find, like $1 billion to help some corporation, because of difficult times, we certainly should be able to find money to buy equipment that the system needs. So I really think one of the jobs or one of the tasks that should be falling on most Indo-Canadians here, is to push the governments both in India and in Canada. I don't know much about the US, so I'm not competent to speak about that, to adequately fund the healthcare, so that the system itself can respond. Now, having said that, one has to realize no system can respond to a pandemic, right? That's a very important point to make. No system can respond to a huge pandemic with a huge number of cases, because we just don't have the beds and resources to deal with that. You may or may not be aware that Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto had to set up MASH units. MASH is short from Mobile Army Surgical Hospitals in the parking lot, because there were so many patients that were coming in were COVID positive. So imagine a poor country like India. They will be completely overwhelmed. So I'm not advocating that the systems can take care of pandemics, But in normal times, we should be funding the system adequately to take care of whoever needs healthcare, because healthcare is a right. It should not. It's not a luxury, And for too many people in India, it's a luxury, and that's just not fair in my humble view. So I'll stop there. I'll be happy to take any questions later on.
Sure. So, absolutely. So, since you are here with us right now, I'll ask you maybe one question,
Sure, please.
or two until you are here,
Yeah.
and then we'll move to the next speaker. So, in terms of the funding, as you mentioned, I mean, yes, we see a lot. We see a lot of fundraisers in Brampton as well. For Brampton Civic, for William Osler,
Right.
a lot of gala events and whatnot are organized to raise funds for the healthcare system. At the same time, we also see governments, always saying that during whether it's Liberal Party or whether it's a PC party, they all
Yeah.
claim that they have increased the healthcare funding by hundreds of millions of dollars. It is now X amount, previously it was Y amount. So then what happens, to all that increase in funding? I mean, that's a question that a lot of people have. I mean, if the funding has gone up so much,
Okay.
why do we still see so much shortages?
But let me answer that in two parts. Part number one, I just to educate most of your listeners and viewers here, that when the Canada Health Act was passed and Medicare came into existence, the funding formula was 50-50. That means the federal government was supposed to provide 50% of the costs, and the provincial government was supposed to provide the other 50%. The last year that I can remember statistics, like I think about probably 2018, the federal government's portion of that funding is down to 15%. 15% from 50%. Okay. And the provincial government is now at 85% funding. Okay. Now this is for Quebec. I'm sure other provinces are very similar. So when any federal leader or MP says, "Oh, we've increased funding," okay, but are you back at 50%? Hell no, because that'd be tens of billions of dollars. So so federal politicians saying they've increased funding is a pile of crock. Sorry to put it as bluntly, because that's what it is. What the government did not realize initially was that the healthcare budget was going to explode because of the costs that are involved. They didn't expect it to be so high, and they have continuously cut down on their portion of the funding for healthcare, because healthcare is a provincial responsibility, right? It's not a federal responsibility. That's number one. Number two, the other problem is what government did not foresee was that people would live so long and live unto their 90s nowadays, because don't forget, just 30 years ago, if you were 60 years old in the medical system, you were considered old, and we would not give you life-saving treatment. We'd say, you're 60, you're retired, here's some aspirin and morphine, bye-bye. We didn't do many interventions because we didn't have first of all, we didn't have the technology and the pharmacology to save you. That was one. But secondly, you've had a good life. It's time now. In a normal day in my operating room, I'm doing most of my patients are 85 to 95 years old. I did a 105-year-old last week for a broken hip. Right? Those patients we didn't see before. So what does that mean for the system? It means that the system is overflooded by elderly people, which we're not expecting 30, 40 years from the statistics and the demographics. And these people need a lot of care because they usually have not just one problem. They are also, they come, let's say, with a broken hip because they fell. But they also have hypertension, they have diabetes, they might have had a stroke, they might have thyroid problems, and all those are very costly. Nobody predicted this. This is not anyone's fault, but the fact is that this is what is happening. And in this case, what the federal government sort of backed off, saying, "Oh, it's way too high." The other fallacy that we have and there's a very nice article by Conrad Black in yesterday's National Post. Everyone should read it. Is that the system is not, is we take great pride in Canada, oh, we provide equal and fair care to everybody. Okay, we treat everyone equally. That's just not true. That's just not true. You can, I can guarantee you, if anyone who's wealthy in Canada needs care quickly, he's going to go to the private sector. Okay, he's gonna go and to a private clinic or a private hospital somewhere and get his care. You and I can't. You and I will have to wait our turn in the system until it comes. That's just a fact. It's always been a fact. So to claim, and then there are many studies that show that access to healthcare in Canada is very dependent in the income group area you live in. So if you're living in Toronto, for example, in Rosedale, for instance, okay, your access to healthcare is not the same as people living in Brampton or Mississauga. That is just a fact of life, and so that's a myth that everybody is equal and everybody gets competent care. That's for sure. Once you're in the system, you get good, excellent care. But to get access to that care, it really depends where you are in the economic spectrum in Canada. So I'll stop there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the same applies to the provincial governments, actually. That's what I was trying to say as well. Mm-hmm. The provincial governments keep claiming that they have been...
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the provincial governments have been claiming, under Kathleen Wynne government, earlier Liberal Party in Ontario, now the PC party, is that they have increased the funding big time, and all we hear is stories about shortages. So, I mean, the reality doesn't match the rhetoric. That's what I am trying to say. Anyway.
You're very right. You're very right. But the point is, when you say increase in funding, where are you starting from in the base? If you've been underfunding the system for decades, you need, let's say, to put in $1 billion. Okay, I'm just throwing it out there, but let's say $500 million, and you put in 50 million. So yes, technically there's I've increased funding, but you haven't funded the system to an adequate level. So for political correctness, it's great. Oh, we've increased the funding. Look, I gave $100 million or 50 or $200 million, but you're already behind $1 billion. You're $800 million still behind. So this is good for political rhetoric. Yeah. Does it fund the system adequately? No, it does not. And I think one of the things I'd like people, and maybe if people are listening can get this, is please start holding your political representatives accountable. So when you go to a nomination meeting, when you go to a political meeting and so-and-so is up for re-election or for nomination, hold them accountable and say, hey, when my kid is in the emergency room, why is he waiting 18 hours to be seen? Yeah. Why? And then whatever they say, and then they say, okay, what are you going to do to help this problem? And if a democracy only functions if the citizens hold their leaders and politicians accountable. If you don't, then they do whatever the hell they want, right? Yeah. And that's just a fact. Okay, I'll have to leave you there because my patient's already here. So thank you again. I'll come back once I can.
Sure, absolutely. So we'll ask you some more questions when you come back.
For sure. Thank you.
All right. So that was Dr. Shivendra Dwivedi joining us from his hospital duty right now, and we hope he comes back. So that brings us to our next speaker of the day, Mr. Jamal Khan. Tejas, if you can bring up his slide. Jamal Khan is a retired Toronto Staff Sergeant, a 35-year veteran of the police force. After retiring, he taught Police Foundation courses for 12 years, and he lives in Brampton. Currently, he is president and one of the founding members of Peace Services, a registered Canadian charity established in 2007. Peace stands for Prevention of Elder Abuse and Community Education. The proactive organization caters to the needs of seniors and through education brings awareness to families of potential abuse to their elders, as well as the rights and responsibilities of elders, as well as their families. Over to you, Jamal Bhai.
Gee, thank you so much for inviting me. I had a little bit of trouble with the camera. I could I could hear you, watch you, but you couldn't hear me, or maybe you couldn't see me. Anyway, we
All
resolved that
is
issue.
all is well now.
Good morning for us. Good evening for you.
Hmm.
Uh, yes, we have been running this organization called Peace Services, Prevention of Elder Abuse and Community Education since 2007. And we became the Canadian charity. So, what during the pandemic, our focus basically remained within Canada. And as the doctor was suggesting, I think some of the hospitals were not sufficiently funded. So we ended up in our own right as a small organization. We raised funds and we gave funding to various hospitals, including Trillium and hospital in Scarborough and Mount Sinai. Although the funds were not big enough, but whatever we could, we did, and they really, really appreciated that. And so, and the purpose was for the PPT and other equipment. So, as opposed to be donating these equipments, they recommended, they requested that we give them funds, and according to their requirements, specific requirements, so they will make the purchases, and we did that. That was one of them. But the others that was also part of our mandate was to look after the needs of the uh, poor, hungry people and seniors mostly. And I will briefly discuss with you how we help the feed the needy. Basically, there were many families with only seniors at home, and unfortunately, they were left alone. And sometimes you really wonder what's going on. And this Peace Services is a non-religious organization. Our main focus is on South Asians. Okay, so so it's a shocker actually when you talk about this, that some of these people were left alone and they didn't care about the food and things like that. So we were looking around. We went to various religious organizations and hoping that perhaps they have some contact information. And some did. The others didn't. They didn't even know. And when we brought that to their attention, they cooperated and helped us in raising funds. And we just talk about insufficient funding. And the government, they are doing great in terms of helping us. But since we were raising funds ourselves, so they supported us. However, in the meantime, we applied for funding, a grant, and that was approved. They approved our proposal, and they liked it very much because our mandate was to help the needy, and also through education, because we are what do you call it? Not reactive unit or organization, proactive. So prevention is better than cure. So how do we prevent? We are not police officers anymore, so we cannot react in that way. However, we provide education through webinars, and we did one a few days ago, and I think it went over pretty good. That was our first time, but that's how you learn. And but the content of the webinar was very effective, and people really, really appreciated it. So as far as that, and being a former police officer, I could tell you there are definitely situations, incidents that would really shock you when you hear some of these things. I don't want to get into all the details, but people are being used as babysitters, and when time comes for feeding them, they forget that they are humans. The parents are humans, and they need some food in their bellies. They are only thinking about their own children. Can you imagine? And they are the children of someone else. But the someone else has become like a stranger, extended family.
Very, very unfortunate. Very, very
Very
unfortunate.
unfortunate. But however, we are looking around, we are trying to find out some of those people, and successfully we have distributed the food. And we also discovered something, but sometimes you, with good intentions, you prepare food and deliver it to them. But sometimes there is hesitation; they don't like the food or the perhaps even the recipe that we are using to cook it. So what we decided this time is to buy gift cards
Okay.
and and let them purchase their own groceries. Sometimes we actually took them to the grocery stores because they are unable to travel. For example, they don't have a car or they have trouble walking and things like that. So and likewise, similarly, several couple of years, few years ago, before the pandemic time, Syrians, they when they came, we did the same with them too. So we had that experience. So we would even go to food bank, or since we raise some funds, so we give them the money, and we'll basically say that we'll bring you to the grocery store and you buy your own grocery, and that was a very successful program. And considering our limited funds and things like that, the smaller organization, it was a great success. And we were recognized by the government as well as the media. They did some coverage on what we do, our mandate, and things like that. Um, Also, as far as the needs are concerned, the shelters, they were insufficiently probably funded, and there was a rise in usage of these shelters, family shelters, youth shelters, elderly shelters. And we worked with Prime Asia Television, which is a Punjabi television channel, and so they said, yes, we'll love to work with you, because we have also established ourselves the credibility, and thank God we are doing okay. We worked with them and we raised funds to buy 400 blankets and other accessories, and we had a function, and but obviously, you cannot bring everybody because of the pandemic, the COVID-19 issue. But anyway, they distributed them, and some individual homeless people were also invited from the local areas in Brampton. And it was very well, appreciated. So these are some of the things we have done, and we are continuing to do. And because now we have a what do you call it, a grant that is helping us to purchase some of the things that we didn't have before. And we are trying to help as much as we can, and to fulfill our own proposal and the approved the project. And we have hired three summer students. They just finished their term, and because for specific purposes, like such as gathering data, we were getting a lot of information, a lot of contacts, but we didn't have a centralized location for data processing. So this young fellow came, and he helped us. We paid him. But and then on the other hand, there was a girl who was hired to do research on availability of seniors facilities in the province to begin with, things like that, and that these things went very well. We hired a project coordinator, and that person is getting in touch with the guest speakers, and hopefully one of the guest speaker you would be Vipul Bhai. So that will be nice. Yeah, because you are doing great service actually. When I have, this is the second time I have listened to your program, your webinar, and I'm really happy and impressed with the quality of speakers that you invite to sit on the panel and the services that you are providing. That's beautiful. So we will definitely invite you also to be a speaker next time. Just for your information, next time, next end of this month, we have allocated some time for our Brampton mayor, Patrick Brown. Mayor Brown has agreed to come and speak for about 20 minutes, and then we will have question answers and things like that. So we are working with our local politicians also, and the police personnel, obviously. Like we said, what you can predict, you can prevent. And you can predict that some of these old folks, I mean, if you don't take care of them, they will have problems. And we have had situations where kids, don't feed them properly. I didn't want to get into specifics, but and on the other hand, their children feel that they are taking care of the father or the mother, and in fact, they are making money. They are getting the money from the government, like monthly expense for the parents, but as if they are doing koi ehsan kar rahe hain. Sometimes that type of attitude, which really, really bothers me. And when we had situations like that, so we basically brought the facts, the reality to them that if you don't take care of your parents, your immigration or your citizenship could be jeopardized. A lot of people didn't know that because you sign on the dotted line that you will take care of your parents, declaration of support when you sponsor them, right?
Right.
So it was a shocker for them. They never thought of that. And some of them, they were putting pressure on their parents, those who have become elderly now. They own their own home. They said, Dad or Mom, you don't need that anymore. So just give it to us.
Yeah.
Power of attorney or ownership, putting the pressure. We have had those situations too. But this lady, specifically, one example comes to my mind. She never budged. She said, no, I worked hard for it. Your dad worked hard for it. Now I'm a widow. I need some support. And you guys don't support me. So what she did, and we helped her, turn her house into not a rooming house, but a couple of good families. They came in. They were looking for a good place, and this lady was very nice. So they said, "Can we rent upper floor, for example, like a flat?" In the olden days, we used to have that. So I mean, she's happy. So that's what I'm saying. That there are alternatives, there are solutions, and we have a good team. We have people working for CIBC as senior managers, a director actually he's recently become, and another senior analyst who works for Mount Sinai Hospital, and things like that. And we work with a group that goes around talk about safety and security of people at Mandir, Masjid, Gurdwara. And we do that. And we have some officers, serving officers, and plus myself, and on it. And a couple of them are security experts working for a couple of banks. So we work together, and whenever an occurrence happens or threatening occurs, just like the other day, he called me, he says, I'm getting married today. And he said, this is why I can't help you. Staff Sergeant Khan, is it possible that you get in touch with the victim and find out what actually is happening? So I said, no problem. So I said, where is my invitation? How come I'm not invited? So I put him on the spot. So he apologized. He said, no, because I thought you were not participating because of my age, I guess. Anyway, he didn't say that. But so I said, okay, no problem. So we got in touch with the people, and sure enough, apparently a guy called and left a message that I'm going to do harm, bring harm to our people, our community. And then we investigated through police. And that's one thing I appreciate very much. All these incidents that have occurred recently about the hijab and things like that, if you remember, every single person was arrested. So this is why I encourage people to report to the police. Don't go complaining to the media. They are not going to investigate.
Yeah.
Sometimes they blow things out of proportion, unfortunately. Anyway, I don't want to go there. I've said enough.
Sure.
So anyway, we arrested this guy.
Yeah.
Apparently, he was escapee from mental institution. So he had nothing else to do, just call and then made the threat. And they recorded it, they gave it to the police, and they acted on it. Right away, he was arrested. So in the background, we are doing that too, because my previous background. And you
Okay.
have any question, or maybe you want to bring me on the track? If
No,
you
no,
have
that's
any
fine. That's fine.
specific,
I mean, I just had something going on at the back of my mind when you were speaking about elder abuse and, things like that. Because many years ago, I would say at least 15, 16 years ago, maybe 17 years ago, I came across another Indian family. I don't want to name them as well. Um, they were actually kicked out of their own house by their own son in the middle of the
wow,
night at 12:30 at night. They were sitting on the road. So they were kicked out of their own house by their own son, who was supported fully, funded, financed, everything by their parents, who were doctors.
wow,
The father sold his practice in India to pay for education of his kid in Canada, in US. And then when his studies were completed, he didn't need his parents anymore. He kicked them out.
Can
So
you imagine? Can you
uh,
imagine? They
it
don't have any
was
conscience, any ethics.
it was absolutely terrible, and they were living finally in a retirement home. Courtesy some kind-hearted soul. So we were in touch with them for some years until he passed away. So I mean,
And this was 17 years ago. So you can
17,
imagine.
18 years ago,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
you can imagine
Yeah,
the kind of what is going on now. And they have
yeah,
become, some of these people have become like Kawa Chala Hans Ki Chal. You understand that?
yeah, yeah,
They like to behave the way she. They look around, the other people are doing it, so we should do it too. But
yeah.
they don't realize that we have a specific culture, we have a specific values. But they say that, we were born here. We are not,
Yeah,
our culture, our values are here. And anyway, so I didn't want
sure.
to go into all that, but I
So
agree with you. I am familiar with that case, and there was another case, and there are many. As a
yeah,
police officer, I used to get, because I spoke the language, and people had a lot of trust as well as convenience because of the language ability. So they would call me, and they were in the middle of the night, like you say.
yeah,
This another one was in Scarborough, and they did the same thing. They had an argument, and the father, he lost his school. He said, "Is this why we raised you to be what
yeah,
you are, and now you are misbehaving with your mom, and I'm not going to put up with this." And then they dragged themselves out of the apartment building, and they were in the lobby. They forgot that it was the middle of the winter, knee-high snow. But
yeah,
luckily, I guess the son's friend, this old man had the phone number, so he called them, and luckily he had my number. I didn't know them. I don't know the
yeah,
community, but apparently I. So anyway, they got in touch with me, and I took care of them with the local police. The officers went, they investigated, they took them to their safety first shelter, and then the following morning, they went back home and investigated. And obviously, we brought the reality of life in front of the daughter-in-law as well as the son.
sure.
Very uncooperative, very abusive, but tamiz, कह सकते हैं आप. That was how it was. And that specifically, I'm not mentioning, you probably noticed the countries of South Asia, because we don't want, because South
Yeah,
Asians are brown skinned people,
yeah.
and so they all are having problems. They are
So
all having problems. Not everybody, but a lot of them are happening these days. And so you can imagine 17, 18 years ago, that was the trend
Yeah.
developing. And now it is
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
So
So,
I've got two questions for you before we go to our next speaker, Tejas,
okay. Okay.
who you can see on the screen as well. So my first question to you is, you have been working with seniors before the pandemic and also during the pandemic, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what change or difference have you seen in their needs and challenges? And do you see any long-term impact of this pandemic on seniors?
Yes, I do see a lot of the pressure is being put on them, and some of them are they can't take care of themselves. So basically, we need to identify. And a few times, as I was saying, and I think I forgot to mention, for example, the international students who are coming from South Asian countries, and they lost their jobs.
Yeah.
So how are they going to feed themselves? So somehow they found out about peace services, that they knew the peace services is for seniors, but at the same time, humans are humans. They have their specific needs. So thank God through our efforts of the whole team, we raised some funds, because obviously it is the project funds we cannot use. So since we have our own entity and we have been using those resources to raise funds, so we provided some support to these people also, as an example. So I mean, this was definitely a change, a new thing for us also. That our own young people were on the street looking for a food bank, and they didn't know where to go. They're not from here, you see. They came here for further education. So we provided some moral support and literally gave them money so that they can go and buy food as well as rent. A couple of them, they didn't have money for rent. Otherwise, they would have been kicked out. So we raised some funds, and because we investigate first, we make sure that they are not giving us the line. Okay, they are telling the truth. So yeah. As far as the seniors themselves, we have had the problems. This gentleman comes to my mind, and he eventually died. And his kids were at home, and he was in the basement, left alone, nothing. Even his, kids were at home, and they were not taking care of him, and they were, because he was a sick man, he was ill, he was dying. So sometimes you wonder, they wish, perhaps they are praying that he goes away. This is why intentionally, I don't know. I'm not suggesting it's like a murder or anything like that. But when you neglect them,
Yeah.
how can you neglect your own parents? Like there is no, sorry, Mr. Khan, there was no intention. So unintently, you did something that caused him to die.
Mhm.
Is that? What type of argument is that? But
I
these
understand.
are things happen, terrible
Mhm.
things.
So the second question is, I mean, as you know, we hear a lot of negative news, a lot of negative stories, more so during the pandemic. But can you share any positive stories of seniors, especially during the pandemic?
Positive, I guess, through education, as I was saying, we are a proactive organization. So we brought the few back together
Mhm.
through education, through making awareness of their rights and responsibilities. We actually, I'll give you an example. Now, there was a couple, elderly couple, and they were sponsored by their children, and they came. And unfortunately, because of their what do you call the traditional thinking, when they saw the son after dinner getting up and going to the sink and washing dishes, so you understood where I'm getting at. What I'm
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this, I mean, the mother is sitting there, and then she started swearing at the daughter-in-law. What the hell? आपके हाथ उठ गए क्या? तू क्यों नहीं धो रही है?
How bad
ऐसे.
are you?
So, I mean, that was creating problems, right? So, I mean, we told them when we heard about that. So we were obviously concerned about what they were going through, the abuse and unintentional abuse, perhaps, or neglect, because of the daughter-in-law started to treat them like that. They said, "We are not showing respect, and you are creating problems. And why should we bend backwards to help you?" So when we heard about this, then we took the parents aside and we said that, what's going on? Please, before you came, they were doing okay, but this is a part of life here. You help each other. And it was a shocker for them, but then they got used to it. So we brought them back, and they are all happy. And we had a situation where the elderlies were fighting among themselves, husband and wife, because I want to take bath first. I want to use the washroom first, and that type of situation. Although we laugh
Yeah.
about it now, but
Yeah,
that
no.
was a serious thing, and they were
Yes, yes.
fighting, like fist fighting. So I mean, the police was called, and then we got involved in that, and we told them, "Come on, what's going on? I mean, you are the role models. Your kids are watching you, and what are you teaching them?" Type of thing. And then they understood. So a lot of it has to do with awareness, bring awareness to them. Sometimes they just traditionally are used to doing things a certain way, and when they come here, they go through the cultural shock, as we all did. You remember when you went through the cultural shock. But anyway, that's how. I mean, if that is a positive thing, that's what we did, and that's what we do on a regular basis throughout pandemic too.
Sure. Thank you, Jamal Bhai. So that was a very fascinating conversation. So stay with us. We'll move to the next speaker,
Okay.
Tejas Iverly, and then hopefully Dr. Dwivedi can come back. Tejas Iverly, our next speaker, he is a public policy professional with honors in BA from the University of Toronto, MPA from London School of Economics, and MPP from National University of Singapore.
Wow.
He is a former policy analyst with the Ontario government and the federal government, as well as former policy manager for Ontario-wide Industry Association. He is CEO of PCHS Foundation and has graciously agreed to help us coordinate the health forum. So over to you, Tejas.
Great. Thank you, Vipul. Thank you very much for the introduction. Jamal, it's very nice listening to your words and your experiences. It's PCHS. So PCHS Foundation is a entity that works closely with the Punjabi Community Health Services, which is also based out of Brampton. And so the PCHS Foundation focuses exclusively on fundraising on a program called the Langar on Wheels, which is run by Punjabi Community Health Services. And so what the program does, in coordination with the Seva Food Bank at the Malton branch, so they provide meals, custom-made meals for seniors who are limited in their mobility. So for instance, they're disabled or too old and cannot go around, cannot go out, or in some cases just have financial issues. And are unable to leave the house and have transportation issues. So, the program gets meals created for them and delivers it to their house. And these are typically custom-made meals. So, because of old age, they may have limitations on their diet, like low fat, low sugar, no salt, those kinds of limitations. So the meals are made as per their dietary requirements and then delivered to them. And so because of the pandemic, the demand increased significantly. But then because you had because there was obviously contact when you're delivering the food. So there was initially, there was a huge transition that the program had to go through where they came up with the new methods of delivery so that to ensure that the same number of meals were delivered, but it was on a slightly different schedule. So they did their best to keep the program running and to meet the needs of the program itself. So that's a short overview of what that program is. So I'm here mainly to talk about, I'm also a consultant to charities and nonprofits, and I work with different charities to provide CEO type services. Work with them to get grants, and file the paperwork and so on. So I, over the last year, ever since the pandemic hit, I've worked with a few clients, and so I just wanted to go over and do a quick presentation on the experience, just quick overview of the different supports given by the government to the charities and nonprofits and what they did. And then I'll go over a sort of case study of two of my clients and give an experience of what they did during the pandemic. So I'll just bear with me. I'm just going to start that PowerPoint. Okay, so this is a quick overview of supports to nonprofits during the pandemic, and also the different activities that they engaged in over the pandemic, how they pivoted, how they shifted, and how they continue to provide services, and the changes that they had to go through to continue doing what they were doing. So the first, one of the big things that the federal government did was they announced the Emergency Community Support Fund back in last summer, and this was a $350 million fund to support nonprofits and charities across Canada, and this was distributed through three partners: the United Way, Canadian Red Cross, and the Community Foundations of Canada, because processing all of these applications at the central government federal government level and then dispersing it would mean a lot of paperwork, would have slowed down the whole process. And since time was of the essence, the federal government decided to go this way. They divided up the money among the three entities, and they also divided up in terms of charities to one partner and nonprofits to the others, so as to expedite the process. And the funds were distributed over two rounds. One was an application round that took place or ended in the summer, and then they had another round of funding that concluded in the fall. So one round ended up sometime in June, July, and the next round ended up in October. And so those two rounds used up that $350 million fund. Now, of course, not every application was funded, not every organization received support, but this did go quite a long way in terms of helping organizations stay afloat and continue providing services. So just to give an idea, this is from the Community Foundation's website of the sort of variety of entities and streams that the funds were given to. And the one I particularly want to point out is the $44 million here that were given to people experiencing low income or living in poverty. And the next big one is children and youth. So you can see that pretty much anyone who you would ordinarily need support, even without a pandemic, and which are served by nonprofits and charities, pretty much had an increase in demand because their supports or their other means of livelihood that they would have counted on during normal times, pre-pandemic times, was suddenly gone. And so you had to suddenly have limitations on mobility in terms of income and so on, which created huge pressure. And so these are the sort of streams that this fund and these charities and nonprofits were focusing on. To particularly focus on Jamal Khan's point, you see seniors and elders also received more than $20 million as per this graph, if you look at the third line. So vulnerable communities did receive some support from the government. So this is the sort of division that they came up with in terms of who would go where. So if you were a nonprofit, you would go to the Canadian Red Cross. But if you're a registered charity, you would go to either the community foundations or United Way. All organizations came up with a pretty clear path, so to help organizations decide who would go where and what sort of funding was available to each one of them. And to give an idea of how widespread this support was, this is a map from the Community Foundation's website, and you can see that nearly every part of Canada received funding, and typically in proportion with to the population spread, but literally every part of Canada was received some amount of funding. So, and I'm not being a partisan here, just trying to, given my background in public policy and government, and also sort of echoing Mr. Khan's point, like there was support provided by the government, and it did go out and it did reach where there was a need. So I'm going to talk about the experience of two of my clients, two charities. One was a Toronto-based membership association, the Indo-Canadian one, and the second was a Canada chapter of a education-focused US-based charity. So they fund education projects in India. So I'm just going to talk about what their experiences were during the pandemic, especially in regards to government support, and also what they did and their pivot. So the first one was the Toronto-based Membership Association, and they qualified for a Red Cross grant. Now the Red Cross criteria was minimum $5,000 in terms of grant, and you had to provide a reasonable application, provide supporting paperwork to show that you existed prior to a certain date, and so on. So this association, pretty reasonable sized organization, has about 500-600 members, and they conduct several events over a calendar year. Each event has about 400 or 500 attendees. So they would make, like most other organizations, would have their income through these events. And so a membership fees only get you so far, right? Like there are a drop in the bucket in terms of the annual funds of an organization. So they qualified, and so they applied for this Red Cross grant, which, as I said, was for over $5,000. And so this was to recognize the pivot in their activities of organization. And so we had to talk about what we were going to pivot to and how that was going to keep track of COVID-19 protocols and still help with different teams. So what this nonprofit, what I worked with them was we focused on anti-isolation activities, which was one of the criteria. And in particular, we focused on seniors and newcomers, which are two pretty vulnerable populations because they already have somewhat, because of their mobility and perhaps they're retired or they're old, their connections are a bit more tenuous or a bit weaker than what you would have otherwise. And so we focused on them because they would have yoga classes on weekends, which were suddenly canceled, right? So seniors who already have health issues, who would have benefited and who regularly attended these yoga classes, 100 to 150 every Sunday morning, suddenly had nowhere to go, right? Like you could not attend these yoga classes. So we that was the main aspect of our application, where we said we're going to conduct virtual yoga classes because where earlier to the cost sharing agreement, we couldn't do that anymore in terms of doing in person. So with the project funds would hire a yoga instructor, would help pay for the Zoom account because you're going from having a free Zoom account where you're just doing meetings among yourselves to having something where you need capacity for several hundred. So they applied for that, and so we. And there were other different types of activities that they would do, but only virtually. and there were proposals for doing, for providing food to some of the international students who were stranded, who needed some support and who needed support from us in terms of food and income supports. So that was that. It, of course, this wouldn't completely get them to the same funding level as before, but it went a long way. The application process was, as I said, reasonably straightforward. And this is where I think one of the things to point out is this sort of creates a bias in some way, because it benefits those organizations who have a good handle on all the administrative needs, right? So there may be an organization which is well-meaning and which is doing great work, but because they don't have staff or don't have anybody, they may not have all of their paperwork together. And so, some of them may have been missed out. And I'm not blaming anyone, it's just the nature of things. Maybe a better process can be brought up. Maybe there can be some changes that can be made in terms of, keeping paperwork together for these charities and nonprofits, right? But for us, in terms of, during my support to this client, straightforward process. I coordinated with the executive. We submitted it on time, and the funds flowed quickly. So we used it for virtual yoga classes, which were quite popular. We had about 50, 60 seniors and even others tune in on a regular weekly basis. And in the end, that became so popular that the instructor continued for a few weeks more on a volunteer basis. And at the end, the client came up with a program with another organization, and they continued the yoga classes for 6 more months. So it ended just a few weeks ago. And so this went on. The support was adequate, the funds were used, and the disbursement was fairly clear. And in terms of the wrap up, there was one activity which they wanted to do, which was to have a outdoor activity, a fall hike. But unfortunately, if you remember, last fall, the cases started increasing significantly. They went down over the summer, and then in the fall it went up. So that activity was canceled. And so there were some savings in the end, which we didn't use. But so overall, this was a successful case. This was a charity that was a nonprofit, that was affected, that applied for the grant, got funding, and did well. The second one, the Canada-based chapter, so they focus mainly in terms of raising funds in Canada and then dispersing it to different projects in India. So because of the pandemic and because of still the impact of the pandemic in India, they did a lot of fundraising appeals. Now, this organization wouldn't qualify for a grant because it did not have an office, no staff, and it did not engage in any activities in Canada. It raised funds and then dispersed them to different entities in India. So, but at the same time, it raised a lot of funds. We sent out appeals due to the different factors in India, and the client actually raised significant amount of money through mobilization. Okay, so again, in terms of disbursement, and I don't know, this was something I had wanted to ask Dr. Dwivedi, but there was some because of changes in the law in terms of in India in terms of receiving funds from abroad, there were some issues in terms of dispersing the funds. So it took a longer time, despite the need, emergency need in India. And so while I'm no longer with the client, at least at the time of I was with them, we were trying our best to get the funds flow to them quickly. And so, this is sort of how we had two experiences, one which got funds, another did not get funds, and where the money you had some other issues in terms of flowing the funds. So I'll just go over quickly in terms of, this was a survey done by an organization called the Ontario Nonprofit Network, which is based out of Toronto. So they surveyed just under 3,000 nonprofits across Ontario. And as you see, 67, one of the major pivots was operating virtually. And now, this year, 2021, 67% of them are operating virtually. So this has an impact in terms of, a significant amount of layoffs that happened, the offices that they may no longer need or may not be able to afford. So this is something to keep in mind for the nonprofit sector in terms of a new normal for them. Will the nonprofit sector ever go back to the same as before, and how will that work out? And this other aspect, which was last year, they found that over 51% were not sustainable over 12 months. But this year, you will see that number is reduced to 35%. So the government supports did work to some extent, and as we are coming back to normal, things are improving for the nonprofit sector. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of them did lay off a lot of staff, and at this point particularly, only 53% plan to rehire all laid off staff. So that's a lot of, unemployment that has happened at this point. And in terms of demand for services, as you see, nearly 2/3 of nonprofits experience increased demand for services. As I think Mr. Khan's experience has also proven, this is borne out in data, and it's not just a little bit, but by a lot, by 2/3 of nonprofits. So next, as I mentioned, the Emergency Community Support Fund was very popular, with a quarter of the nonprofits applying and nearly a quarter receiving funds. But at the same time, 64% of nonprofits did not receive any funding. So imperfect, but at least something better than nothing, right? And again, here, social, community, and health organizations were more likely to receive emergency funding. So something was there. Some organizations did receive some support, not perfect by any means, but at least there was an effort made, and a reasonable one at that. And so in summary, the pandemic has hit everyone very hard, financially and otherwise. The government did provide some support, and it did help everyone tide over to some extent. And there are other supports as well, the emergency wage subsidy, the business subsidy, and so on. Whether you qualified or not was different, but at least there were several different programs, right? And so overall, nonprofits do play a vital role, whether it's Mr. Khan's peace services, my clients, the Punjabi Community Health Services that I mentioned, my own organization, PCHS Foundation. So they do play a vital role. And it's important to think about how they are funded in the future, because they're not going to go away anytime soon. And as Dr. Dwivedi also mentioned, there is chronic underfunding of different organizations of different parts. So the pandemic has shown their vital role, and this is something that we really should think about, what their role is, and to think of nonprofits and charities as partners rather than just an afterthought. So that's my presentation. I'll stop here. Vipulji, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Tejas, for all that data and the surveys and everything. We must say we had a fascinating conversation with Dr. Dwivedi at the beginning. Coming right from somebody who is very much part of, the healthcare system, not only looking after patients, but he's also teaching medical students. So we get both sides of it, and I hope he can come back. He is now free from his surgery operation that he was assisting in. It was remarkable actually that he joined us from his call at the hospital. So we hope he can come back. Let us go through the sponsor slide quickly, and then I will ask you one question, Tejas, and then we'll take MP Sonia Sidhu's message. She is an MP from Brampton South. So this health forum, as we see, it's actually session number 6 today, is supported by City of Brampton's Advanced Brampton Fund. And we are thankful to our partner organizations, PCHS Foundation, as well as Suno Canada, with the matching funding support provided by Best Ayurved, Process Research or Tech, Dentistry on 10, Truly Financial, Blue Umbrella Financial Services, Greens Life Sciences, Tangentia, and Kodak, without whom we would not be able to do this. As people, if you have been following our sessions, over a course of 12 sessions, we would bring together close to 100 experts. We are almost at the halfway mark, and this includes the city councillors, the Peel regional councillors, Mayor of Brampton, who already came in our very first session. We have mind, body, wellness, nutrition, mental health, anxiety, diabetes, you name it, all kinds of experts who have been participating in every session. So it's a lot of information that we have gained ourselves actually, while hosting this. So Tejas, a quick question for you. Do you think the pandemic funding has been a lot of money that the government has given? Do you think the pandemic funding have made people as well as companies and organizations, both for profit and not for profit, become more dependent and rely more upon government supports? Would that be a long-term unhealthy consequence for the not-for-profit sector?
I mean, the not-for-profit sector, the for-profit sector, it's definitely a different thing. They shouldn't rely on government supports. It doesn't make sense. You're taking a risk. It's a business venture. So a for-profit enterprise is definitely entitled to a fair and reasonable marketplace where the rule of law is followed and there is stability and clarity in terms of rules, and there is a fair and even playing field. But beyond that, in terms of providing support, I don't think so. Providing subsidies, which will ultimately end up lining the pockets of CEOs and giving out dividends to shareholders while they're laying off their staff or not paying them well. I don't think they really need or deserve any of the supports that they got at the corporate level. In terms of nonprofits often fill a void. They come into existence because there is a gap in terms of need and what the government is providing. And it's not necessarily always a bad thing. Something like Mr. Khan's peace services, which where you have that element of cultural propriety, right? Like you're providing some services that are culturally sensitive. So the government may not necessarily be able to provide that service by itself. And so you have to go through a proper entity. Even something like the Langar on Wheels provided by the Punjabi Community Health Services, that again is culturally appropriate and sensitive. So it makes sense in several instances for the government to somewhat contract out these kinds of services and supports to nonprofits, which are better connected and more have an ear on the ground. And they are free from the bureaucracy of government. I mean, there is definitely requirements in terms of accountability and all of those, but the nonprofits are able to do that, right? So it's a good mix of private and individual donations, corporate donations, and government support that helps these nonprofits provide the services they need. And quite frankly, ideally and hopefully, a nonprofit should go out of existence, because the longevity of a nonprofit is not necessarily a good thing, right? Like if the nonprofit continues to exist, well, the need is there. So why does the need continue to exist? So like elder abuse, for example, shouldn't happen in the first place. Now that it does, well, okay, there's a nonprofit, but hopefully we get to a point where society is sensitive enough and sensible enough to realize that it shouldn't happen and it stops happening. And so a nonprofit that focuses on that will cease to exist because the need is no longer there. So this is that stopgap arrangement, right? So I feel that nonprofits should receive some support. They should be on the radar of the government. in terms of have they become dependent? I don't think so. I think a lot of nonprofits value the independence that they have, that they get by raising money themselves. And while I'm at least my clients, quite a lot, the ones that qualified, were grateful for the government support. But I think they'll be quite happy to go back to doing their own programming and not have to fill out a 20-page form and give it all that accountability to someone else.
Right. So I believe Jamalji wanted to say something, but before that, I'll just say one line. There's a very well documented instance, actually, way back many decades ago. In India, Mahatma Gandhi was invited to open a senior citizen, a foster home or something like that. Like a retirement home for senior citizens who were kicked out of their own houses, things like that. So he refused to inaugurate. And he said, I'll be very happy to come and join you to close this down. When you no longer need this center, then you can invite me and I will gladly come and close it down.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Dwivedi, for coming back.
Sorry for the delay.
That's fine. No. We actually, we were very thankful just discussing that. We had a very fascinating conversation with you at the very beginning. So thank you for that. And I will come back to you again. Jamalji just wanted to say a word.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jamal bhai.
Let me unmute myself.
Yes,
a couple of things I wanted to, because Teja, he brought excellent points. And as a matter of fact, for the not-for-profit organization, the Canadian government, they admit that they don't have the expertise of culture, the language skills, and things like that. And they love to have people like us, a partner with the government, because we are doing it from our own free and goodwill. Because, for example, I'm not getting paid. This is all 100% voluntary thing, because our organization is not big enough to have employees, right? So and also you made a point, very valid point, that administrative work is equally important.
Yeah.
All the documentation must be done. And sometimes our community, like the South Asians, they are not as good as they should be. As a result, many of them lost their license to operate as not-for-profit organization because of the lack of keeping, like bookkeeping and all that. Anyway, so I just wanted to point that out. And also, we have included, I had neglected to mention the yoga classes virtually. We are starting that again virtually, as well as we recently held a entertainment musical for them, and they loved it. Some of these old songs, Hemant Kumar, Kishore Kumar, Rafi Saab, and all these, they loved it. They were very happy, and so whatever we could provide to make them, feel at home and wanted. I'm talking about specifically seniors, that we are doing that, whatever we can. And for example, Rajiv Sood is a chartered accountant who works out of a organization and on Bay Street, but he has passion for music. And he has created so many things. Internationally, now he's bringing singers who match, for example, Kishore Kumar, Hemant Kumar. His voice is very close to Hemant Kumar. So he does that himself to appease seniors and families. And also he and his family, they are good painters. So we are starting to teach how to paint a picture, for example. And so people, they like that. They are interested in spending time in a positive, in a constructive way, as opposed to be looking out the window. Because as a former police officer, I could tell you on night shift, my officers, I was a staff sergeant in charge of the station when I was on duty, and the officers were talking on the phone continuously. So afterwards, I said, what's going on? Who is that? So he says, this is an old lady. She is looking out the window wherever in my division. and they have nothing else to do. They got kids, they have boys, girls, but they don't take care of them. So they get so lonely, especially on the Christmas night. Can you imagine? On the Christmas night, they don't come to visit them, and they are lonely. And this is why you will know that more and more, God forbid, suicide happen because they are lonely. They just had enough. I don't want to live anymore, type of thing. So we, as peace services, we try to find these people, since our focus is on South Asians, and these things are happening in South Asian community also.
Yes, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, Dr. Dwivedi, you will be now with us for some time.
I have about 15 minutes till I have to go back.
Sure.
So
Okay.
I don't have much time. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So I have got two questions for you. Let me take the
Sure.
questions first.
Sure.
And then we have got one video message from Member of Parliament for Brampton South, Sonia Sidhu. So we will take that after. So first question for you is, you teach medical students as well, right? Apart from being a doctor yourself. So what difference, if any, have you seen in the medical students regarding their chosen profession? Are they more worried? Are they more willing to help out? Are they all stressed out? Because we hear a lot of stuff, about how much pressure they feel and the extra additional overtime and things like that. The safety issues, for their own families as well. So, what is happening to them?
I'll address that at two levels. One is there's undergraduate medical students, and then there's the postgraduate residents, right? So on the good news on that is that residency training has become a lot more, I'll say, saner, in terms of there's more limits on how much a resident could work. The terms intern residence comes about because in the old days, I'm talking about in the early 1900s when training started, an intern was a doctor who lived on the ward, on the floor, and looked after those patients. A resident doctor during lived in the hospital 24/7. So that's where those phrases come from. Now, residency in my time, just to give you an example, I'm talking 1980 to 1987, as chief resident at the Montreal General and the Royal Victoria, I used to be on call one-on-one. That means 24/7, I was on call, covering for my residents, okay? So if a junior resident got into a problem, he would call me 24/7, I'd have to go in. Now the rule says, by law in Quebec, it's maximum 1 in 4. So at 3 nights a week, I'm off. So in that case, the pressures have come down, to be fair, at residency training level. Now, at the undergraduate level, I think there's a lot more online learning because of the pandemic. There's a lot of things that have come up. The stresses are there. They always have been there. I mean, it's a difficult profession to be in terms of studies and things. Most doctors have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's, then an MD for 4 years, then another 5 to 10 years of training. So it's a lot of work to get to practice your profession, and there's a lot of stress. But I think there's increased stress because of the pandemic, because of what it's causing, and it's also there's increased stress because of I wouldn't say job insecurity, but insecurity is where you will be able to practice, because the bigger cities, the bigger hospitals, there aren't that many posts coming up. So people are concerned, well, I have to go and practice, way up north in Ontario or in Quebec. And so that has definitely caused some concerns among students that we see and residents.
Sure. Another aspect is online and virtual services or the consultation that the doctors are providing, especially since last year in March. Now, the thing is, until March of last year, before this pandemic started, every time I did a blood test for something, right, I would get a call from the doctor's office that your results are in. So then I would have to go to a doctor's office, wait there for 2 hours, 90 minutes, so it's always a big lineup. So you go there, you wait for 90 minutes, for 2 hours sometimes, and then you go in.
5-minute meeting.
Not even 5 minutes. You go in there, the doctor will pull up your file on the screen, and you say your blood test is normal. And they kick you out in 2 minutes. Which now they do over the phone. So, do you think this online and virtual services is here to stay permanently, or is this also a temporary thing?
No, absolutely, it's here to stay. Telehealth, I can't comment on Ontario, but in Quebec, has played a huge role in the pen for consultations. So basically, a lot of office visits are by online. So the doctor will take his history and examine you online, tell me, show me where you're hurt and all this, and done. And then a lot of the results now are communicated by nurse practitioners. So we've seen a huge influx of nurse practitioners. The only job is to speak to patients, explain things to them, and then if the patient wants, he can then see the doctor at a later date if that is needed. But a lot of the healthcare, as you have seen in terms of vaccinations, are being done by pharmacists. So I think those aspects of telehealth are here to stay. They'll be integrated into the system, and I think they'll be, because it's better for the patient, and it's better for the doctor, because it frees up our time to deal with the more serious issues that patients are facing. I would much rather see someone who's really sick and has a serious issue than seeing somebody with a cold to tell them, well, your sugar's a little bit high, increase your medication. That the nurse can do. So I think that division of labor is already here to stay.
Absolutely. So I wish this change would have come sooner. But anyway, it took a big pandemic for this little change to take place.
Absolutely.
Anyway, better late than never. And although the today's topic is about the role of not-for-profit, I'm just asking you questions more as a healthcare practitioner. The last question from my side, and then I guess they just want to ask you something. We read a lot of reports about nurses, although we talked about students and the interns and whatnot. But we see a lot of news reports about the nurses and how many are on the verge of quitting because of the pressure and whatnot. And that's happening all over the place, not just in Brampton or GTA or Canada. It's India, it's US, it's everywhere.
Absolutely.
So what will that do to the profession of nursing? To the new nurses who may not want to do this, maybe look something else.
Okay, well, for that, we have to remember I spoke about underfunding in the healthcare system. So, let me give you an example of how maybe your listeners understand. Let's say on the ward, 30 years ago, when the system was adequately being funded, one nurse in the day would look after, let's say, 4 patients. Okay. In the nighttime, maybe she'll go to 6 or 8 patients, because there's less nurses at night. The patients are sleeping. The reality today is that on the floor, one nurse might be looking after 8 to 10 patients. And sometimes at night, one nurse is looking after 25, 30 patients. Now, you can imagine the increased workload that those nurses are facing, right? In the same time, their pay hasn't gone up, compared to what other people make, maybe, lawyers, teachers, doctors, whatever, and their pay has been pretty stagnant, right? So not only are you overworking the nurses, you're not paying them very much, right? So that's a huge problem. I mean, why? And these are very qualified professionals. And the other issue has become, because the system is underfunded, care is not good. Who gets the brunt of complaints? It's the nurses. Yeah. Who does the family complain to? Oh, my dad's waiting for an hour. Nobody's changed the bedpan. And he's waiting for his pain pill. The family sees it. They complain to the nurse. So they're getting a lot of complaints about how bad they are, and they're not. They're doing a hell of a great job in difficult circumstances. They're being underpaid compared to everybody else. And then you may not be aware, but a nurse has a legal obligation. And this is in this sense. If you're in an emergency room or an intensive care unit, all right, and you're on the day shift and you've done 12 hours or 8 hours, well, if the replacement nurse doesn't come in for any reason, her kid's sick, she's sick, you have to stay. So you have to now, after, let's say you have a 12-hour shift, you've got kids and a husband at home. and I'm being a little bit sexist, it could be a wife and a kid's home, okay? But you now have to do an extra 12-hour shift, okay?
Without notice.
Without notice, without anything. You are legally, you cannot leave your job in the hospital unless there's a replacement nurse who's going to look after your patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it happens once in a while, okay, but I can tell you in my emergency room that's happening on a frequent basis. Every second or third time my nurses are coming in, they're being forced to do double shift. Okay. Now that's something the public doesn't hear about or know about. But who the hell would work if you have to put on a 24-hour shift every third time you're coming into work with no extra pay? You get your overtime, but your overtime is being taxed, so you're not making much more money in your pocket, right? Yeah. I mean, those are terrible health conditions. And then on top of this, now you've done 24 hours. Now I'm on call for 48 hours. I started 8 o'clock this morning. I'm finishing 8 o'clock Monday morning. I could be in the operating for 48 hours straight. Okay. Now I'm used to it. I've been doing this for 30 years. But for a young person coming in, a nurse especially, and she has to do 24 hours and she wants to start a family, and 3 days later, another 24 hours. Who the heck wants to do a job like this?
That's exactly why I asked that question. Yeah.
But this is what's happening in the profession. So this is why younger nurses are quitting, going to and in Quebec, they're going to the private sector. Now, what does that mean? In Ontario, you have blood tests and things can be done by labs, right? Yeah. So now, if I can go and work a normal 35-hour week, 7 to 8 hours per day. I know it's Monday to Friday. I know I'll get off on time to go pick up my kids. I'm not working any weekends and holidays. So nurses work weekends and holidays. Why wouldn't I do that if it's the same money?
Exactly. Yeah.
This is why you're seeing a lot of nurses who are leaving the profession and doing other things. Because this is not fair to the nurses. They didn't sign up for this. They did not sign up to being forced to stay. And imagine, suppose you're a single parent,
yeah,
and your kids are in daycare. You've come and you're told, oh no, you have to stay now for another 8, 12 hours. What do you do with your kids? You got to now, phone around. Hopefully the kid's father's involved, or you phone the grandparents or something. Once in a blue moon, it's okay. But if you have to do that, on a regular basis, nobody's going to put up with that. And that is what is happening. I would like to touch one other point that the previous speaker, I don't know, I think Mr. Khan was mentioning, and that is suicide. Okay. And suicide is something, and mental illness is something in the South Asian community we don't speak about at all. At all. Okay. And I congratulate him for the work that he's doing in talking about this senior citizens and depression and things. But, there have been a record number of suicides amongst international students. I think I mentioned earlier, we're dealing with that. There's a group we've formed called Sayog, which is trying to do that. But we have to, the pressures of society now are much greater, and the support system of the let's say the family structure, Indian family structure, is not there anymore. You might be in Toronto, your kids might be in Los Angeles, or whatever. Now you're alone. So this issue of depression and suicidal thoughts in elderly people is something that we should be dealing with, and it should be dealt with by the community groups. People go to temple on Sundays. Why can't our temples in the GTA and our mosques and our gurdwaras call in a psychiatrist to speak to people, to recognize signs of depression and suicide? You have a captive audience in a way, right? They're all there anyway. They're coming for the service, right? So please, take the initiative, invite someone to come and speak to them about this issue. It's really important, and hats off to Mr. Khan and his group for doing the work, because this is really needed. It is really needed.
You will be happy to know that in just our previous session number 5, we discussed this very issue, mental health, anxiety, depression, suicide, by international students also in great detail.
Okay, excellent. Good work.
So Tejas, you can ask your question, and then we'll take the message for Sonia Sidhu, and then I will deliver the closing remarks.
Yeah, Dr. Dwivedi, actually, one of the partner organizations of this health forum, SUNO, is actually working on that very topic. So they work with international students in the GTA and Ontario because they are addressing that very issue of suicides by international students. And so they've come about very recently as this, especially during the pandemic, where the need for support services has gone up significantly. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so they could tie up with Sayog. I will text you the number. What we've done 3 or 4 webinars on this particular issue for international students, and we actually, because our let's say consultant is Professor Amresh Srivastava, who's Professor Emeritus at the University of Western Ontario. And so he is one of the world's foremost experts on suicide. He's a great resource on this subject. He has like 5 or 6 books on suicide and over 50, 60 papers. He's one of the internationally renowned people in our community, which most people probably don't know of. And he's involved with my group, which did the webinars. And one of the things is, I think that is not just in this paper, but many issues, is the services are very fragmented. So different people in different communities across Canada do great work, but then it's not known outside. And, and if you have, so I think one of the things that behooves us is to sort of combine efforts and work together as a team. Because I have this great resource person who's fantastic, right? Suno may or may not. So why not use the resources to help the community better, right? And you see that so many times, like with international students, when the problem came, we were giving financial support, and we had temples in Montreal giving them free groceries for 4 or 5 weeks in a row. So and this Mr. Subhash Khanna was very helpful in this. He's the chairman of the board of the Hindu Mandir in Montreal. But they went on for 6 weeks. And all a student had to was come and sign that is a student and take his week worth of groceries. So there are resources that are available in the community, but they work in silos. They work in silos, and that is at the detriment of the community as a whole. So I think that's something we could be working on better to try and get people to work together to serve the common interest.
Absolutely. We'll be very happy to connect with them, actually. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we also do this education forum, as I mentioned. We have already done 2 sessions as part of the education forum with presidents and deans and also registrars of universities from Calgary, from Montreal, from Ottawa, from Vancouver, from Toronto, from Haryana, from Michigan. So as we were discussing in our previous session, I said we'll be very happy to take this up as a full-on topic as part of the education forum. Because everybody talks about the students, but they only talk about the fees and their contribution to the economy. But does any college or university have any kind of counselor or any system to address this issue?
I have to correct you. They do have all universities have consular services for students. That's not a problem. But I can tell you that we are interacting with a number of the colleges with their consular services to make them culturally aware. So they're more aware of the problems that are faced by Indian and international students, because the cultural context is not understood by the Canadian consular system. And so, yes, they have services, but they're inadequate in terms of knowledge. So that's the issue. Okay.
So as I mentioned, we'll now take the message from Brampton South Member of Parliament, Sonia Sidhu. She is a Liberal Member of Parliament from Brampton South, first elected in 2015 and then re-elected in 2019. She is a member of the Standing Committee of Health and a strong advocate of diabetes prevention and cure. So let's hear what she has to say.
from Brampton South. Before beginning, I would like to thank Mr. Vipul Chani for organizing this panel and inviting me to speak with you all. Canada, India, USA Development Forum have continued raising awareness and promoting dialogue on many key issues in the community. And for this, I thank you. Today, we'll be discussing the role of NGOs during the pandemic and their importance in helping our community recover from COVID-19. As we all know, community organizations, charities, and non-profit were some of the hardest hit during this pandemic. However, they were also one of the most resilient groups throughout COVID by adapting quickly to the protocols. Many organizations here in Brampton made sure that all Canadians had access to essential products and goods. Local grassroots organization in Brampton stepped up to help support our health system by running vaccine clinics, working in ICUs, and helping in long-term care homes, and helping the community. As your member of parliament, I made sure that these organizations were given the support they needed to help others. Almost immediately, we announced millions of dollars in funding for Canadian charities to help them meet the growing demands of the community. When the nation decreased, we had their back and pledged to continue supporting them through the recovery phase. We also established the $300 million Emergency Food Security Fund to help food banks and other food rescue organizations to help people with food insecurity. Once again, I would like to thank Mr. Chani and the Canada-India-USA Development Forum for organizing this panel and allowing me to share my thoughts on the work of NGOs. Keep up the good work and discussion, and I look forward to seeing you all in person soon. Thank you.
That was Sonia Sidhu, Member of Parliament from Brampton South. I guess that's it for this session. Let us once again recognize the support of our sponsors and partners. This health forum is supported by the City of Brampton's Advanced Brampton Fund. And we are also thankful to our partner organizations, PCHS Foundation and Suno Canada. And the matching funding support has been provided by Best Ayurved, Process Research Ortec, Dentistry on 10, Kotak Mahindra Personal Injury Law, Tangentia, Greens Life Sciences, Blue Umbrella Financial Services, and Truly Financial, who have very generously supported this effort. So today was our session number 6 as part of this 12-session virtual health forum. We have got 6 more sessions to go. And we must thank all of our speakers today, Jamal Bhai, Dr. Vivedi Tejas, and MP Sonia Sidhu. So that's it for today's session, and we'll see you soon again. Thank you.